Former President Barack Obama breaking his silence after President Trump's blatantly racist post earlier this month depicting him and the former First Lady Michelle Obama as apes.
I think it's important to recognize that the majority of the American people find this behavior deeply troubling.
Obama over the weekend calling the Trump administration shameless, saying they don't respect the presidency.
There's this sort of clown show that's happening in social media and on television. And what is true is that there doesn't seem to be any shame about this among people who used to feel like you had to have some sort of decorum and a sense of propriety and respect for the office, right? So that's been lost.
Hey guys, welcome Dr. John Podcast. So here what is happening right now, Obama broke his post-presidential silence and delivered a calm, surgical, comprehensive dismantling of Trump's entire presidency. No diplomatic hedging, no gentle suggestions. The measured cadence made it hit harder, not softer, and the fallout sent Trump into a visible spiral of fury. The setting was electric, the cameras were positioned, the crowd was already buzzing with anticipation before he even stepped to the microphone.
Obama's reaction coming more than a week after both Republicans and Democrats condemned that post. The White House initially defended it, calling it fake outrage. But the criticism only grew. Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, the Senate's only black Republican, calling the president's post the most racist thing I've seen out of this White House. Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi writing, "This is totally unacceptable." The president later deleted the post 12 hours later. The administration later telling ABC News a White House staffer erroneously made the post. And then on Thursday, a week after that video was posted, President Trump telling reporters he had not disciplined the staffer. And despite lawmakers on both sides calling on the president to apologize, the president refusing.
No, I didn't make a mistake.
So Obama says this is all a distraction. He said that both he and the former First Lady still travel the country and that they still believe in kindness, decency, and courtesy, Rebecca.
All right, well said.
When Obama began to speak, he did not waste time on pleasantries or soft openings. He went directly at the core of what has defined the Trump era, identifying the moral rot, the celebration of greed, the mainstreaming of bigotry, and the elevation of cruelty as a political strategy. He called it out by name, telling the audience and the nation that the current administration had made a mockery of the values that previous generations fought and died to defend. The words were chosen with the precision of a man who understands the weight they carry.
Are you going to seek congressional authorization for...
Well, no other country has ever done it. It's never been, as you know, most people consider it totally unconstitutional. Also, we had a ceasefire, so that gives you additional time. But no other country's done it. We're in the midst of a big victory. This is a victory like we haven't had since Venezuela, okay, to be honest with you. We haven't had, but, you know, we have a country that lost its way. It really lost its way. That's our country in terms of the military. Now we have a great military. We're on our way to another victory, a big victory, and I don't think that it's constitutional what they're asking for. These are not patriotic people that are asking. You know, when they say, even the losers, even the ones that say all the wrong things, admit that it's been amazing what we've done. The Strait is totally shut down. It's flawless. It's totally 100% shut down. Now, we've been dealing with Iran.
This was not a partisan attack from a cable news pundit or a fundraising email from an opposition party. This was a former president, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, a man who governed through economic crisis and restored American standing in the world, standing before the country and declaring that the current president is failing catastrophically and doing so because of choices rooted in ego rather than sound judgment. The pivot to foreign policy was where the speech transformed from a scathing critique into a political nuclear weapon.
They want to make a deal. They're not there. They're not with it. They're sort of, they get close, and then a new group of people come in. They don't know who their leaders are. They have no idea who their leaders are, but they're very confused, and that's because of the success we've had militarily. They essentially have no military.
That's a president weighing in on something Ed talked about, that reality based in law. The president only gets 60 days to use military forces in a conflict without then needing congressional approval. After that, Unless Congress approves the war or authorizes use of force, our troops have got to come home. As Ed just mentioned, that 60-day clock expires tonight. School of War podcast host, Free Press columnist, and CBS News contributor Aaron McLean joins us now to talk about this. Aaron, good to have you with us on CBS News 24/7. Walk us through your reaction to what the president just had to say.
Obama zeroed in on the Iran war with a level of specificity that made it impossible for the administration to dismiss his words as vague or uninformed. He called the entire military adventure a catastrophic failure, not a setback, not a difficult situation, not a complex geopolitical challenge requiring patience. A catastrophic failure.
Well, I'm not surprised that the president, Secretary Hegseth, and others are looking for a justification for this vote not to be held. I think the claim that the clock somehow pauses because there's a ceasefire it's a pretty questionable one, not least because part of the ceasefire involves this ongoing blockade of Iran, which is a military operation, generally conceived as an act of war to blockade another country. So it's not really clear what the nature of the ceasefire is anyway. However, thin legal justification, but the basic political fact here is that this AUMF, this authorization for the use of military force, which is what the law is called, which the United States has not passed one of these things since the two we passed not long after 9/11, would have to clear the United States Senate. And in the United States Senate, it would need the support of at least some Democratic senators to clear a filibuster. I think the odds of that are pretty limited.
Well, the president also gave some insights on what could happen next. Let's go ahead and listen to that, and then I want to get your take on the other side.
He traced the origins of that failure directly to the character of the man who launched it, explaining to the millions watching that the decision to bomb, to blockade, to escalate, and to refuse diplomacy was not driven by careful strategic calculation or the sober advice of military commanders. It was driven by ego, by the need to project strength, by an unwillingness to admit mistakes, and by a fundamental misunderstanding of how the world actually works.
Was he briefing you on a different approach? Options? What kind of options? How would it look different?
There are options. I mean, do we want to go and just blast the hell out of him and finish him forever, or do we want to try and make a deal? I mean, those are the options.
Do you want to go blast the hell out of him?
I
and
prefer
finish him
not.
forever?
On a human basis, I prefer not, but that's the option. Do we want to go in there heavy and just blast him away?
Okay, so you heard the president there use the word options. As you hear some of those options laid out, which do you think is most likely?
He connected the dots between the bombs falling on Iranian infrastructure and the price per gallon flashing on the gas pumps at every corner station in America. $6 a gallon, a number that has become an anchor around the administration's neck, was laid directly at Trump's feet as the predictable consequence of reckless saber rattling and the disruption of global energy markets. The reaction in the room was visceral and sustained.
Well, I think there's three broad courses of action ahead. One is a return to military operations, which you hear the president expressing some reserve about there, but certainly not ruling it out. And I think what you would see is a strike on Iranian economic targets, just like was being contemplated earlier this month. If you recall all the talk about bridges and power plants, I think targets like that would be on the list. But of course, that would provoke Iranian retaliation, and we would see a return to combat, much like we had earlier this spring. The other possible outcome is a deal. It could be a good deal by the terms of this administration, or it could be a bad deal by their terms. And right now, as the president seems to suggest, the two sides are not particularly close. So I would actually, if you're going to make me make a prediction, I would go with door number 3. And door number 3 is continued stalemate, this kind of game of economic chicken, maybe even economic suicide pact the longer it goes on, where we blockade them and they close the Strait of Hormuz, and we all wait to see what breaks first economically.
The crowd erupted, not with polite applause, but with the kind of roaring, standing ovation that signals something deeper than agreement. People were crying. They were holding on to each other. They were cheering so loudly that Obama had to pause and wait for the noise to subside. This was not just a political speech to a friendly audience. This was a release, a catharsis for millions of Americans who have been watching the chaos unfold, feeling the economic pain, seeing the protests grow, and wondering if anyone with real stature and credibility was ever going to say what they were all thinking. Obama gave voice to that collective frustration. He gave language to the inchoate anger. And in doing so, he fundamentally altered the dynamics of the political moment we are living through. The specific conditions that form the backdrop of this speech made the timing absolutely devastating for the administration. The National Guard had just been deployed against American citizens exercising their constitutional right to protest at the Capitol. Hundreds of arrests had been made, creating images of uniformed soldiers confronting peaceful demonstrators that evoked the darkest chapters of American civil conflict. The Speaker of the House had publicly admitted that his conference was in a state of panic, a stunning confession from a party leader that the wheels were coming off. The Vice President had returned from a diplomatic mission to the Middle East with nothing to show for it except confirming that the administration's Iran strategy was not producing results. Gas prices had broken through the $6 threshold, a psychological and economic barrier that triggered a new wave of public anger. Protest crowds had swelled beyond 10,000 people, transforming scattered demonstrations into a sustained movement. Into this maelstrom of dysfunction and despair, Obama stepped forward and validated everything the critics had been saying. The response from Trump was not the response of a confident leader who can brush off criticism with a wave of his hand and a pivot to better news. It was the response of a cornered animal, a man who recognizes that the blow he just absorbed is potentially mortal and lacks the emotional regulation to process it with any semblance of dignity. The true social feed became a real-time window into a psychological breakdown. 23 separate posts in a span of less than 24 hours, a torrent of rage and grievance that grew progressively more unhinged as the hours ticked by. The opening salvos attempted to defend the Iran policy on the merits, but the arguments were thin and unconvincing, lacking any substantive rebuttal to Obama's core charges. When those defenses failed to gain traction or shift the news cycle, the tone shifted to personal attacks. Obama was branded a treasonous has-been, a weak leader whose legacy was a fraud, a deep state operative still pulling strings behind the scenes. The later posts abandoned any pretense of coherence, devolving into all-caps rants about rigged systems, the swamp, and the vast conspiracy arrayed against him. This was not a president mounting a defense. This was a man in the grip of an uncontrollable emotional spiral, and the entire world could see it. The contrast between the two men, which the media immediately seized upon and began broadcasting in split-screen comparisons, was more damaging to Trump than any single argument Obama made. On one side of the screen was the former president, calm, dignified, speaking in complete paragraphs, marshaling evidence, connecting causes to effects, addressing the American people as adults capable of understanding complex realities. On the other side was the current president, furiously thumbing his phone, spewing insults and conspiracy theories, unable to maintain composure or focus, lashing out like a wounded animal rather than leading like a statesman. The visual, the juxtaposition of dignity versus chaos, of leadership versus tantrum, crystallized everything voters have been feeling about the current administration. You cannot unsee that comparison once it has been made. It sears itself into the collective consciousness and becomes the implicit frame for every subsequent story, every subsequent crisis, every subsequent poll number. The protesters understood immediately what Obama had given them, and they seized it with both hands. The crowds that had been gathering at the Capitol, already sizable and already passionate, swelled dramatically in the wake of the speech. 15,000 people, a number that represents a significant escalation from the already impressive turnouts of previous days, converged on the seat of government. They were not just chanting generic slogans anymore. They were chanting Obama's exact words. They were holding signs printed with his quotes. The phrase catastrophic failure became a rallying cry. The language about greed and bigotry being celebrated became a banner under which the movement organized. Obama had given the protests something invaluable, the legitimacy that comes from having a respected former president validate your cause. When the man who occupied the Oval Office with historic approval ratings says your grievances are justified, it becomes much harder for the media to dismiss you as a fringe element or for the administration to paint you as paid agitators. The veterans who showed up outside the Speaker's office represented a particularly potent political symbol. These were not stereotypical anti-war hippies or campus radicals. These were men and women who had worn the uniform, who had served their country in combat, who carried the physical and psychological scars of America's wars. They were standing in the halls of Congress, shouting Obama's words at the Republican leadership, demanding that the Speaker explain why American service members were being sent to die in a war that a former commander-in-chief had just labeled a catastrophic failure driven by ego. The presence of veterans in the protest movement changes the political calculus. It makes it significantly harder for the administration to wrap itself in the flag and claim that criticizing the war is somehow unpatriotic. patriotic. The patriots are the ones demanding accountability. The patriots are the ones echoing Obama's call for sanity. The political implications are cascading through the system at every level. For the Democratic Party, Obama's speech is a gift of incalculable value. It provides a messaging framework that is clear, emotionally resonant, and backed by the most trusted voice in the party's modern history. Democratic candidates running in competitive districts now have permission to go much harder at Trump than they might have felt comfortable doing before. They can cite a former president's words, not just partisan talking points, when they go after the administration's handling of the war, the economy, and the basic norms of governance. The fundraising emails practically write themselves. The television ads are already being cut. Obama's face and Obama's words are going to be featured in every competitive race in the country, and there is nothing the Trump campaign can do to stop it, because attacking Obama only reinforces the contrast that is killing them. For the Republican Party, the speech has created an acute and intensifying crisis. The leadership has been trying to hold the coalition together through a combination of fear, loyalty, and the promise that Trump's political instincts would eventually be vindicated. Obama's intervention makes that strategy vastly more difficult to sustain. Vulnerable Republicans in swing districts now have to answer a very specific question. Do you agree with the former president that the Iran war is a catastrophic failure, or do you stand with Trump? There is no middle ground on that question. There is no artful dodge. The voters will demand an answer, and whichever way a Republican member answers, they lose a significant chunk of their coalition. If they break with Trump, the base will primary them. If they defend Trump, the swing voters will abandon them. Obama has forced a clarifying moment that is exquisitely painful for the GOP. The polling trajectory was already heading in a dangerous direction for the administration before Obama spoke. The approval rating on war handling had already slipped into the 30s, a territory that historically signals a presidency in terminal decline. The overall approval numbers were scraping along at levels that make governing nearly impossible and re-election a fantasy. What Obama's speech did was accelerate the trend. It gave permission to the voters who were already unhappy but had been reluctant to fully express that unhappiness. It gave them a vocabulary and a framework. It made their private doubts into publicly acceptable positions. The polls in the coming weeks are going to reflect this acceleration, and the numbers are likely to get much worse for the administration before they get better, if they ever get better. The gas price connection is the element of Obama's argument that will prove most durable in the public mind, because it connects foreign policy failure to kitchen table pain in a way that no amount of spin can obscure. Every time a voter pulls up to the pump and watches the numbers climb past $50, $60, $70 to fill a tank, they will remember what Obama said. This is not inflation in a vacuum. This is not some mysterious global force that no president could control. This is the direct, predictable, and avoidable consequence of a reckless foreign policy driven by ego rather than strategy. The blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the bombing campaign, the threats and counter-threats, all of it has disrupted the flow of oil through the most critical choke point in the global energy system. The price at the pump is the cost of that disruption. Obama made that connection clear, and once that mental link is forged, it becomes a permanent feature of how voters evaluate the president's performance. The international dimension of the speech should not be overlooked. Obama specifically addressed the erosion of American alliances, the burning of bridges with partners who had stood with the United States through decades of shared struggle, and the cozying up to dictators and strongmen that has become a defining feature of Trump's diplomatic approach. World leaders are watching this speech. They are reading the transcripts. They are seeing a former American president, still widely respected on the global stage, declare that the current administration has made the United States less trusted, less reliable, and less capable of leading the free world. That assessment, coming from that messenger, validates what many allied governments have been saying privately for years. It makes it easier for them to distance themselves from Washington, to pursue their own strategies, to hedge their bets. The damage to American soft power, already severe, is compounded when a president of Obama's stature confirms to the world that the emperor has no clothes. The psychological profile of Trump's reaction is worth examining because it reveals so much about why this presidency is failing. A healthy, confident leader, when confronted with criticism from a respected predecessor, would respond with a mix of respect, substantive rebuttal, and a redirection to his his own accomplishments. He would acknowledge the critique, offer counter-arguments, and pivot to a forward-looking message. Trump cannot do any of those things. He cannot acknowledge criticism without being diminished by it. He cannot offer substantive rebuttals because the facts are not on his side. He cannot pivot to accomplishments because the Iran war is not producing any. So his only available response is attack, deny, insult, and rage. The 23 posts are a symptom of a deeper incapacity, an emotional dysregulation that renders him incapable of responding to challenges in a manner befitting the office he holds. And every voter who watches this meltdown sees a man who is not in control of himself, let alone the country. The permission structure that Obama created extends far beyond the Democratic base. There are millions of Americans who voted for Trump, who hoped he would be different, who wanted him to succeed, who have been watching the chaos and the failure with growing alarm, but have been reluctant to admit it publicly because of the social cost within their communities. Obama's speech gave those voters a way out. If the former Democratic president, a man they may have opposed politically, is saying what they have been thinking privately, then maybe they are not crazy. Maybe they are not traitors. Maybe they are just honest patriots who can see that something has gone terribly wrong. That permission, that psychological liberation, is what converts private doubt into public opposition, and public opposition is what shows up in polling booths. The midterm elections are being fundamentally reshaped by this intervention. Before Obama spoke, the race was shaping up as a referendum on the incumbent, with the normal dynamics of an unpopular president dragging down his party. Obama's speech transformed it into something larger, a battle over the soul of the country, a choice between leadership that is calm and competent and leadership that is chaotic and driven by ego. That frame favors Democrats enormously. It energizes their base. It attracts independents. It peels off soft Republicans. It turns a straight referendum into a broader contest about values and character. And that is exactly the kind of election Democrats win when they have the right messenger. Obama is that messenger, and he is now fully engaged in the fight. The historical echoes of this moment are profound. Former presidents have criticized their successors before, but rarely with this level of directness, this level of specificity, and at a moment of such acute crisis. Teddy Roosevelt ran against his successor, but he ran as a third-party candidate in a general election. Herbert Hoover criticized Franklin Roosevelt, but he was a defeated president with no political future. Obama is a successful two-term president with high approval ratings, a global reputation, and no personal political ambitions beyond protecting his legacy. When he speaks with a unique moral authority that no other figure in American life can match. That he chose this moment, this crisis, this audience to deliver this message is a sign that he believes the Republic is in genuine peril, and his words will be studied by historians for generations as a pivotal intervention in a dark chapter of American history. The road ahead is now clearer than it was before Obama took the stage. Trump will continue to rage. He will continue to post, he will continue to attack, but the direction of travel is unmistakable. The president is weakening, his coalition is fracturing, his poll numbers are deteriorating, his foreign policy is producing nothing but failure and funerals. And the former president, the one who left office with a nation on the mend and the world in order, has stood up and told the American people that they deserve better. That message is now loose in the body politic, and it cannot be recalled, it cannot be countered, it cannot be shouted down, it can only be heeded or ignored, and the voters will render their judgment soon enough. The meltdown we are watching is the proof that the message landed. The 23 posts are the confirmation that Obama hit exactly where it hurts, and the slow, grinding collapse of the presidency we are witnessing is the inevitable consequence of a man who cannot face the truth when it is spoken aloud by someone he knows in his heart is everything he pretends to be and will never become.